Okay, looks like we've got the recording going. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Virginia's BEAD Unlicensed Fixed Wireless How-To webinar. This is being hosted in accordance with the new policy notice that came out from NTIA on June 6th regarding the BEAD benefit of the bargain round and other amendments to the program by the Trump administration. One of which is to take a look and see if any unlicensed fixed wireless broadband is available to any BEAD eligible locations. So we're going to get into what that process is and required as in the federal guidance and talk about a little bit how we're going to operationalize that in Virginia. Of course, this webinar is being had at the point in time where we're out of the 7-day notification phase for unlicensed fixed wireless providers to signify their intent to challenge. We're now in the midst of the 7-day evidence phase, where those unlicensed fixed wireless providers that previously did signify their intent to submit information now must submit that information in this currently running 7-day window. So to get into the first slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the requirements were outlined in the federal policy notice issued by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration on June 6th. That's called the BEAD Restructuring Policy Notice. You might hear me refer to it as the benefit of the bargain round policy notice. I'm referring to the same thing. And the policies outlined in that unlicensed fixed wireless section under the optimizing BEAD locations section of that policy notice outline a couple of phases of a process that states must follow when it comes to better understanding if unlicensed fixed wireless coverage is available at BEAD funding or BEAD eligible locations. So the first stage of that is that states, in this case Virginia, must review the national broadband map and notify unlicensed fixed wireless providers of a 7-day window to respond with an intention to submit evidence that BEAD funding is not required for the locations that unlicensed fixed wireless provider serves. We did put out a public notice of this, notifying unlicensed fixed wireless providers of this 7-day calendar window on Friday, June 13th. That 7-day calendar window closed on Friday, June 30th, and now we're having the webinar today to talk about the next bullet, which is that states will allow 7 calendar days for those providers to submit documentation that supports the claim that they offer services that meet the same technical and service standards required for an unlicensed fixed wireless application for a BEAD subgrant. All of those requirements are outlined in Appendix A of that federal policy notice that was issued on June 6th. And the policy notice that was issued on June 6th also gives states the opportunity to request more information from those unlicensed fixed wireless service providers. So now I want to summarize what the Virginia Office of Broadband, what we did to digest that guidance and also relay it to unlicensed fixed wireless providers across the Commonwealth. So on June 13th, as I mentioned previously, we put out that policy notice that digested the federal policy notice in terms and made it relevant to our applicants under the BEAD process in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And an aspect of that guidance was that upon public notice of it on June 13th, unlicensed fixed wireless providers had 7 calendar days to email that email that you can see on the screen to intend that they intended to submit evidence. This window did close on 11:59 p.m., 7 calendar days after the public notice went out on June 20th. It looks like we might have had the doorbell ring in the Teams meeting, so I'm going to make sure that we have everybody here. Great. So moving on to the second calendar bullet, moving on to the second bullet there, no calendar involved. Those unlicensed fixed wireless providers, once they notify us of the intent to submit information, have 7 calendar days from the day they submitted that intention to submit evidence to back up that claim that unlicensed fixed wireless service is available already at BEAD-funded locations. So if a organization submitted that notice of intent to us or signified their intent to us last Thursday, then they've got 7 calendar days to this coming Thursday at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time to submit that evidence to back up those claims. So all those evidentiary requirements are provided in Appendix A of NTIA's June 6th policy notice. We also reference one of the former policy notices of our office under the BEAD program under the previous rule set But we wanted to bring forward those requirements to better help document whether or not unlicensed fixed wireless service is available to BEAD eligible locations. So that's the last reference you can see there in our prior policy notice on alternative technologies. You can find more details in that in the actual guidance document that we have posted on our website under the benefit of the bargain round section on our BEAD webpage. So now we're going to dive in a little bit into what those specific requirements are to submit evidence to document that unlicensed fixed wireless coverage is available at BEAD eligible locations. So on the screen here on this slide, you can see what NTIA's requirements were in their June 6th policy notice. There are 4 bullets there on the screen. I won't read to them verbatim, but I'll probably come close to make sure I get this right and relay these correctly. Number 1 is making sure that unlicensed wireless providers have sufficient capacity to meet the statutory speed requirements, which are, as we know, 100 megabits per second download, 20 megabits per second upload. They must be able to demonstrate the ability to provide 5 megabits per second of simultaneous capacity to each broadband serviceable location in the project area. Unlicensed fixed wireless applicants must also demonstrate they've addressed the problems of interference from other Part 15 users. I'm not a technical expert on this. This is explained a little bit more in the policy notice issued on June 6th by NTIA. My understanding is that this deals with other wireless operators operating near the same spectrum bands that unlicensed wireless providers utilize to provide broadband access. So make sure that when you're submitting evidence to us, a document that you provide service to BEAD eligible locations, make sure you're addressing the problems of interference from other Part 15 users in that documentation. The next one, you want to make sure you have reserved base station capacity to account for periods of high interference. So that may include foliage on trees. That may include high network demands on snow days from school. All right, we want to make sure that your network is designed in a way that has reserved base station capacity for periods of high interference. The last thing we want to talk about and see as required by the federal guidance is that we need to see adherence with network equipment manufacturer best practices or guidance regarding items such as capacity loading of base station radios, minimum signal strength necessary to meet speed latency requirements. There's more on that the next slide. And then backhaul requirements for base station deployments. So these are the requirements in summary that are required to be submitted. These are requirements outlined in the federal policy notice issued on June 6th. But as I previously mentioned in a former slide, that there are also other requirements that state broadband offices may infuse into the process to better help document what the unlicensed fixed wireless providers are capable of operating in terms of broadband access to these BEAD eligible locations. And if you've read the policy notice, you'll see that we incorporate requirements from our former policy notice on alternative technologies by reference in this policy notice. So you'll see here those requirements lettered out. If you're familiar with our VADI program, then you'll see these are familiar from former VADI challenge processes to document whether or not wireless coverage is available to proposed project areas under that program. It starts out with a cover letter that outlines the technology that has been being utilized to provide broadband access. It must also include a signed and notarized affidavit affirming that everything in the attached packet is true in terms of service documentation. It needs to include minimum and maximum speeds available in the challenged area. And when I say challenged area on this slide, I mean the locations that the unlicensed wireless provider, the BEAD eligible locations the unlicensed wireless provider is claiming to already have service available to. It's just that challenged definition is a term that was pulled through the VADI guidelines. But in terms of challenge, what we mean is unlicensed fixed wireless trying to substantiate the coverage is already available to a subset of specific locations they've identified that are BEAD eligible. Item D, we want to see street level data of customers receiving service within the challenged area. So what this should look like in an evidence submission should be perhaps an Excel file, perhaps some other kind of list where we can see addresses of customers receiving service. And then going into the next one, we want to see that also relayed to us in a point-shaped file or CSV, a mappable CSV file of locations that you've identified that are BEAD eligible, but you believe meet the requirements outlined in this webinar, outlined in our policy notice on the benefit of the bargain round. And it also includes, at that location level, the broadband speeds available at each location via the alternative technology, which in this case is unlicensed fixed wireless coverage. There are a couple other technical requirements that we want to relay here, one of which I've got a technical detail slide coming up, but that's about heat maps indicating the RSSI values in the challenged area, which account for terrain and peak vegetation. We want those provided to us in zip file format, and this helps us get a better understanding of not only the speed capabilities of the network, but also what's the signal strength and the capability of being able to actually deliver on those promised speeds. I've got a slide next up that explains those details. We also want folks, again, getting into one of the more technical requirements, that any unlicensed fixed wireless provider that's submitted that intent to say that BEAD eligible locations are already served by their networks, those challengers are required to submit verified speed tests at the time of peak network usage, usually between 7 p.m., 10 p.m. at night when folks are online after they've gotten home from work, on all or portions of the challenged area. We're not going to ask you to submit a speed test for every last location and that you're trying to substantiate that your service is already available at, but we do have percentage of location requirements based on the number of locations that you are saying already have unlicensed fixed wireless service. So you can see those in Appendix C of the body guidelines. I got it in 2 slides coming up later on. And then lastly, the alternative technology provider must show it's reasonably capable of delivering such service to some or all of locations for at least 4 years after the date of Virginia's final proposal submission. So not only can you provide service today, but you can provide this quality of service for the next 4 years as well. Next up, I want to get into unpacking 2 of the last technical requirements delivered on the previous slide. The first one is received signal strength indicator. We also refer to this in the acronym of RSSI. It's an estimated measure of power that a wireless client device is receiving from an access point or router. So again, speed is one thing, signal strength is another. This is a measure of signal strength, which is a good measure of how consistently or how reliably you can deliver those claimed speeds. You can see here in terms of what is considered a strong value versus what I consider a weak value. If you're a wireless provider, you're very much familiar with what these measures are. Negative 55 dBm is considered the best possible signal. Measures of neg 90 or below are considered unusable and not capable of reliably delivering broadband speeds. So if you do submit RSSI values at the location level that are below neg 90 dBm, we would not consider those locations serviceable or capable of being covered by that unlicensed fixed wireless technology for the purposes of analyzing those unlicensed fixed wireless service claims. So you can see an example there on the right that demonstrates, without any impediments such as foliage or topography, but you can see there on the right, in theory, closest to the tower, high signal strength, a little bit further from the tower, medium signal strength, far out from the tower, low signal strength that's perhaps not capable of delivering broadband level speeds as outlined in the policy notices. Also want to unpack a little bit before we do the wrap-up slide when it comes to evidentiary requirements of speed tests. I mentioned on a previous slide that we're not requiring you to speed test every last location that you're working to substantiate that service is available at, but we are going to require either 10%, 7.5%, or 5%. I'll get into that in a second. To review the requirement that you're required to submit verified speed test at time of peak network usage on all or portions of the challenged area. Just to elaborate on that a little bit, peak network usage generally means between 7 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night when everybody's on the network after they've gotten home from school or work, and streaming Netflix, gaming, perhaps doing homework, that sort of thing, when peak network usage and network demand is at its greatest. We also want to make sure that those speed tests are being distributed throughout the project area. So if you submit a claim that unlicensed fixed wireless service is available over an entire county, we want to see speed tests distributed across that entire county, not just in a pocket of an area or really close to a couple of towers on one side of the county. So make sure they're distributed to better document that you offer this service at locations across the challenged area, not just in certain hot pockets here and there. So to get into the speed test requirements, if you are working to substantiate that coverage is available at less than 500 locations, then the requirement is to speed test 10% of the locations that you were claiming that unlicensed fixed wireless coverage is available at. If it's between 500 and 1,000 locations, then the requirement drops to 7.5% of locations that a speed test must be conducted on. And then if it's 1,000 or more locations, then you've got 5% of locations to speed test. Now, we know in some cases too, and this is getting into the bottom paragraph here, that in some cases, unlicensed wireless providers or providers of any nature that are building networks, deploying networks, maybe you don't have 5% of customers on the network in terms of locations that are actually taking service. So in the event that you don't have enough actual customers to conduct those speed tests at those given percentage, we'll also consider field tests to satisfy this requirement. But when you submit those field tests to us, we need to include that information listed in a spreadsheet along with the address or unit or location where the speed test or field test was conducted. If those are incomplete, we won't consider the challenge or claim valid. And we want to make sure that any of those speed tests that are conducted, provided they're at the given percentage requirement, are actually conducted at locations where they're either an active customer, or if it's a field test, it needs to be conducted very close to a potentially active customer's house to document that speed is available there at the priority broadband levels as outlined in the policy notices. So that was a pretty fast crash course through the different technical requirements to document that unlicensed fixed wireless providers need to do to document whether or not service is available at BEAD eligible locations or not. Just briefly speaking, you can find those BEAD eligible locations, and I'll open up a new tab here to make sure that folks know how to navigate to that. Those locations are on the Virginia Open Data Portal. So once you go to the Virginia Open Data Portal, you should type in BEAD application areas. BEAD application areas first result. And you can see here under the title BEAD application areas, there are 3 different files. The 2 important ones are these 2 CSVs. One is the unserved and underserved eligible locations. And then one of them is the eligible community anchor institutions. So if you're working on building this evidence to document that unlicensed wireless coverage is available at these locations, you need to start with these locations here in these 2 files. So with that, I'll go back to the PowerPoint version of this presentation and open it up to see if there are any questions. Well, if not today, there's also a few more days in this window to submit this documentation. So if there are any questions, make sure you email this email address on the screen. This is our general BEAD technical assistance email inbox, broadband at dhcd.virginia.gov. So if there are any questions after this webinar, please send them to us. We'll also post a recording of this webinar along with the slides publicly on our BEAD website as well in the next 24 hours. So please be on the lookout for those as we put this information and resources out there. And we look forward to working with you on this process as well as applying under the BEAD program. So if there aren't any more questions, I'll go ahead and jump off and be in touch. Thanks, everybody.